Welcome to Feelin Seen with Dean, hosted by Dean Michael. Let's get into it.
For the longest time, I thought accepting myself would solve everything. That once I finally became comfortable with who I was, life would become easier. But that's not what happened, because the day you finally accept yourself is also the day you become responsible for protecting that person. And nobody teaches you how to do that. And that was the part I was not prepared for. For years, I focused on becoming confident, being comfortable in my own skin. I thought that was the work. But after I finally got there, I realized something else started happening. Old habits did not disappear overnight. Old people did not suddenly change. Old environments were still there waiting for me. That was the moment that made me realize this more than anything. After doing so much work on myself, there were people I had known for years who suddenly acted like my presence did not even exist. They ignored me. They walked past me. They treated me like I did not deserve to be there. And the old version of me immediately wanted to pull someone aside and ask, "What did I do wrong?" But this time I did not, because I realized something. They were not reacting to something I did to them. They were reacting to something that I finally did for myself. I finally chose myself, and not everyone was comfortable with that. The more I grew, the more intentional I had to become about who had access to my energy and my life. For a long time, I believed everyone deserved unlimited access to me. If someone needed me, I showed up. When they called, I answered. Whenever people wanted my time, I gave it, because I thought that's what being a good person looked like. But healing has a way of changing your standards. Not because you stop caring, but because you finally realize you're responsible for protecting the person you've become. The old version of me believed everyone deserved unlimited access to my time and my energy. The healed version of me understands that access is built through trust, consistency, and mutual respect. Access is earned. It's not owed. One of my biggest changes in my life, I remember having a really close friend, someone I genuinely loved. I showed up for them constantly. I celebrated them, and I always made time for them. I wanted to be the kind of friend I hope everyone had. But as I started building my life and pouring more time into my growing, they naturally had less access to me. Not because I stopped caring, but because I finally started investing into myself too. What surprised me was not the distance. The more my life grew, the more resentment seemed to grow too. That's when I learned something I'll never forget. Some people do not miss you. They miss having unlimited access to you. And those are two very different things. Because here's what took me even longer to realize. The biggest challenge was not learning who deserved access to me. It was recognizing the version of myself that kept giving it away. Because protecting yourself is not just about changing the people around you. Sometimes it's about changing the patterns you've carried for years. One of the biggest mistakes I used to make was believing that once I healed, my old patterns would simply disappear. Though I'd never struggle with them again. But healing does not erase your patterns. It exposes them. One of my biggest patterns was breaking my promises to myself. I'd make these incredible plans. I'd tell myself I was finally going to stay consistent. I was going to grow my YouTube channel, stick to my workout routine, start new hobbies, become this completely different version of myself. Then something as simple as 30 minutes of cardio would become a negotiation. I would tell myself, I'll do it tonight. Sometimes I would come back. Most of the times I wouldn't. And at the time, I thought I was only skipping cardio. I wasn't. I was teaching myself that my own word did not matter. Every promise I broke became another reason not to trust myself. And the more I stopped trusting myself, the harder it became to believe I could change. But healing taught me something different. Healing did not stop me from slipping into old patterns. It taught me to recognize them before they became my identity again. Maybe you've been wondering why the old version of you still shows up sometimes. That does not mean you're failing. It means you're finally aware of something you used to do without even thinking. And awareness is where real change begins. Because once you learn to recognize your patterns, you have a choice. Keep repeating them or start replacing them. One of the biggest changes I made was not changing my entire life overnight. It was changing how I started my day. For years, my mornings belonged to everyone else. Notifications, social media, other people's opinions. And without realizing it, I was letting the world decide how I was going to think before I even had the chance to think for myself. Everything changed when I started protecting my mornings. I'd wake up around 4 o'clock in the morning and go straight to the gym. I would not touch my phone. I would spend 30 minutes doing cardio, listening to something that made me stronger mentally. Then I would train for about an hour and a half. My only responsibility was taking care of my mind. I thought I was building a morning routine. I was not. I was protecting the way I thought because I realized if I did not decide what entered my mind first, the world would decide for me. And that small habit changed my identity more than anything else I have ever done. Not because waking up at 4 a.m. is magical. Not because going to the gym solves every problem, but because every single morning I reminded myself that my mind deserved my attention because the rest of the world demanded it. Maybe the first thing you need to protect every day isn't your schedule. Maybe it's your mind, because whatever reaches your mind first often shapes the rest of your day. Because once you learn to protect your mind, you begin to realize the people around you aren't always going to understand the person you are becoming. One of the hardest lessons I had to learn was that not everyone was going to celebrate the person I was becoming. There was someone I worked with who used to compliment me, recommend restaurants, start conversations. They seemed genuinely supportive. At least that's what I believed. But after I spent so much time working on myself, something drastically changed. The more confident I became, the more distant they became. Eventually, it felt like my presence did not even exist. The old version of me would have immediately asked, "What did I do wrong?" But this time, I asked a different question. What changed? And I realized I wasn't the only one trying to make the relationship different. I had simply stopped needing what I had once depended on. Sometimes growth changes the relationship because it changes the role you play within it. Not everyone is going to grow with you, and that does not always make them a bad person. Sometimes it simply means the relationship was built for a version of you that no longer exists. Maybe you've been grieving a relationship that feels different now. That doesn't automatically mean you failed. Sometimes growth changes the people around you before it changes anything else. Because once you accept that not everyone is willing to grow with you, you stop asking who you're losing and you start asking who you are becoming. When I look at my life today, there is one thing I am probably the most proud of. I respect myself. Not because I think I'm better than anyone else. It's because I finally understand that my worth, my intuition matters, my healthy boundaries matters, keeping my word matters, and protecting the standard I've worked so hard to build matters. Years ago, I did not even know what a standard was. Other people decided how they treated me. Circumstances often determined how I showed up. Too many days were controlled by whatever emotions I had to wake up with. Today, I choose differently, not because life became easier. Everything changed because I did. Maybe that's what protecting yourself really means. It's not building walls. It's choosing yourself without guilt, refusing to abandon the person you've worked so hard to become. Because after everything I've shared with you today, I think protecting yourself comes down to one simple truth. For a long time, I thought accepting myself was the finish line. Finally becoming the person I wanted to be felt like the hardest part. I could not have been more wrong, because becoming yourself is only the beginning. Every day after that, you have a choice. Will you protect the person you've become or slowly hand pieces of yourself back to the people, the habits, and the patterns that once convinced you that you were not enough? I've learned that protecting yourself is not about becoming closed off. Loving people less was never the answer. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not becoming someone new, but finally becoming yourself and having the courage to stay that person. Because the world will ask you to become something else. And my hope is that every morning you choose yourself anyway. Because the person you've become deserves to stay. And if no one has reminded you of that lately, I hope this conversation did. And if today's conversation resonated with you, there's one conversation you need to hear before this one can fully make sense. That conversation would be my last podcast, which is called I Finally Accepted Myself. And I think it completes today's conversation perfectly. I'm going to go ahead and link that podcast right here. I would highly recommend you watch that podcast next. And I will see you there.